Hello, good morning. Today is February 18th. Thanks for being there. If you're seeing this and you're joining me live, welcome. I am gonna take a couple of minutes just to give some time to people to arrive before launching into my content. I have a couple slides that I'm gonna share with you. This should be a 45-ish to 60-minute webinar, depending on if we have a lot of questions or not. If you do have questions at any point, you can post in them comments and I will respond throughout the presentation. This is a webinar, it's in two parts. So the main goal here is to talk about goals and how to reach them. And the second part will be more of like a presentation of what I do. And it's completely okay for you guys to, at that point, if that part is not interested, to leave. That's completely fine. So I'm going to share my screen in a minute. If you do have questions, again, let me know. I wanted to start this presentation today by, I figured it was kind of timely because I think when the year starts, people usually have, various goals and ideas. And there's a couple of people who are in the comments. Welcome. I got Nicola here, and Felix. I was there 5, couldn't get in. It's so weird. Maybe there's something wrong with StreamYard. I will have to look into it, but I'm glad that you see that you guys are there. Viewership exceeded. Yeah, that was I think a problem with my my plan, because you have to have the fancy plan and I was on the medium, but I've just changed it, so it's probably fine now. I mean, you're here, so I'm assuming it's good. Glad to see you guys are here. And yeah, so what I was going to say is that I think there's a great timing at the beginning of the year when people are kind of like all into their new plans and everything, but also January is usually a pretty crunch time kind of period for a lot of people who have businesses, mostly because we're starting and then there's like the holidays and everything. So I thought doing in January and February might be a bit better. The agenda for today, as I was saying, so it's broken down into two parts. Reaching your 25 goals, financial goals. This section is broken in 3. So I want to talk a bit more about, reverse engineering your goals and doing the math. And then tricks to get you there. So if you have a goal, what do you do to get there? And then processes, things that I do with my clients and how to help you move the needle as best as possible. Second part, intro to fractional CEOing, what it is, what it's not, when to work with a fractional CEO, and how to work with a fractional CEO. This is more of like an intro of what I do and how I work with clients. And again, completely fine if you sit for the first part. So for the first half, I wanted to start by doing some kind of live math. If you have a couple of you guys in here, I was trying to get someone to come do a live demo with me, but he wasn't available. So I wanted to take a second here to just let me share my other screen. I have another slide that I wanted to share. I built this template, which basically is the goal is to reverse engineer your financial goals. And so for me, the way I like to do it, I'm going to make this here full screen-ish kind of. It's like a tool that I'm planning on releasing that I haven't gotten around to releasing yet, but I figured this would be good a time as any to kind of showcase it here. So the box should be empty because you're going to fill them. And then that's when you're going to go and get your data. So the point here would be to start by figuring out what your goal is, right? So we're going to do, I put 500 because I feel like it's a good goal. You could be 1 million, you could be, 10, it doesn't really matter. The point is understanding what you have to sell and how much that's going to get you close, like how close this is going to bring you to your goal. So if you're selling, let's say you're doing logos, you're a designer, you have an agency, and your main product is logos. So a logo package, let's say, cost $25,000, and your goal is to make $1 million that year. I'm missing a zero here. That's too much. So you need to do, and then the column on the left is basically, on the right, it's going to tell you what you need. These are the results of the math. So you input the green boxes. Assuming you're a freelancer, and in this use case, you want to work 30 hours a week, you don't have any employees, and you take a 4-week vacation. So you need to do 40 sales. These, you're going to work 48 weeks, and then this is total amount of hours you work. Here, as far as your biz dev is concerned, you're going to do activities to generate media attention and traction. So things like networking, ads, webinar, like this one, creating content. So let's say you post on LinkedIn twice a week, and that takes you an hour, let's say 2 hours every week. And then here, every time you have a project with a client, you take 2 hours to kick off the project. So this is getting the knowledge from the client, the data transfer, then making sure the logistics is taken care of. And then the onboarding, this is like the admin stuff. So 1 hour to send a contract and everything. So for here, you close 1 client for every 4 clients you talk to. If you have 4 discovery calls, then, you need to meet with 3.5 clients per week in order to reach a goal. These are data that I'm giving you. So this is basically getting your results, and it's going to tell you this is the time you need to put in order to reach your goals every week. And then here you're going to say, so if you're going to make $1 million every year, just the sales part, we're not talking about the actual production. You need to put 8 hours, almost 9 hours every week, and this represents 30% of your time. Now that you have this, the goal here is basically just to kind of give you an indicator of whether or not you have the right pieces of the puzzle together. Because here you could say this is going to give you to 79%, and then 79% if you're solopreneur, you're a freelancer, most of your time is probably spent doing the task that you are hired for rather than selling. If you have a team and 80% of your job is to sell, and then you have people who are doing the production part, that might, 80% is still a bit intense, I think, but you have an idea of where you're at. And that's really like the basic for it, right? Is this reasonable or not? And then that's kind of segueing into my my second topic, because the first step is kind of understanding where you're at and how does all of those pieces look together. The second issue here that we have a lot of the time is the time management, and that's kind of why that's the first thing I take care of when I work with clients, because there is a how do you say that? So basically, when you're a founder, you are oftentimes the main roadblock for everything. So it's your company, and you're kind of like doing a bit of everything, and you are getting stuck in this place where you're trying to build your company, but you have so many different things going on that you're kind of killing your own focus. And that's partly FOMO, that's partly urgency, I guess, and the fact that sometimes there's no one else to do the thing. So a couple things that are, I think, really good to do is to start by doing an audit of your time. For me, when I start working with clients and my client is usually the CEO. So when I ask questions to my CEOs, like, where did your time go last week? Most of them don't know. It's quite common, and to a point where what I started doing is syncing a time management software that says basically tracks your time into boxes. So at least you don't have to do anything with the info, but you have some information about where your time went. Um, Ways to kind of address the lack of time is to try and basically be ruthless with where your time goes. And that starts by doing some focus days or like focus periods in your calendar where you would have a couple of hours every day where this is this task and you start your day by these are my three main priority items. Something that works really well for me, and I'm not saying it works really well for everybody, time blocking is really great if you are able to respect it in a way that you know where your time goes and that's where it's going to be going. Um, there is a way to have flexibility. I think the main thing that I hear a lot is time blocking is not flexible because it's not built in a way that kind of allows for that those needs. So if we go back to my tool earlier, when there was like a couple of boxes for the time to onboard a client and the time to kick off the project, those things are things you know you're going to have to do, right? So you know that in order to get to your sales goals, you need to spend 1 hour onboarding a new client. And if that means you have one new client every week, well, every week in your pool of time, you should have some kind of time allocations to put towards onboarding a new client. And then that way you have some kind of flexibility in your scheduling. And the other thing I think is, not most meetings are not useful. I think a lot of meetings are useful, but there's a need for having time to actually do things. And a lot of CEOs are often stuck kind of answering everybody else. So you're not really in control anymore. And the last thing I have my clients do, and that's usually the first thing I start with, is an audit of your role and responsibilities. And for me, that the reason for this is twofold. So one, taking the time to look at your role and responsibilities and figuring out that what are you actually doing? And again, that brings the whole point of earlier where if you're putting it on the paper, you're going to be aware of what you're doing versus what you should be doing or what you want to be doing. Because that's the other thing. Sometimes you have things that you are doing that are taxing. They're just things you have to do because you can't, you don't have anybody else to do them. And so it becomes interesting to kind of write them down. This is where I am. This is what I want to be. And this is how I would like my role and responsibilities to evolve through time. That's also a thing that we don't really take into account. If you have things you want to learn or skill sets, sometimes you start a business because you have a skill set or an ability to build something for someone. And then you get to a point where your business gets bigger and you have employees and you're now managing other people and payroll and production, but you're not doing that first thing that is the reason why you started your business. And so having the time to write these down and be like really intentional about where you're going, where you're putting your time. And if you have a clear set of role responsibilities, the next thing you could do is go through the time audit and be like, well, all of these things that I did are not technically under my role and responsibilities. So how do I remove them from my calendar, or can I get someone else to do those things for me? And that's a good way to kind of also free up some of the mental burden, like the weight that you have with the running of the business, and also focus you on getting where your goal is. Because if you're saying my goal is to make $500,000 and I'm going to make $500,000 this year by doing XYZ, well, you need to make sure you can actually do XYZ. I've been experimenting with the focus days. So I basically booked a recurring meeting for myself in my calendar for Wednesdays. So every Wednesday, I don't have any meetings, and I have like a meeting with myself basically, where I'm gonna work on my specific business goals. And we're mid-January now, and I've already done 3 of my yearly goals that I'm kind of finished with, based on the fact that I just freed up some time to work on them, and I did, and things actually moved surprisingly fast. I'm not promising anybody is going to get those things done as fast as I did. I mean, some of my things were kind of quicker things, but I think just, again, focusing on what is it that you want and then be intentional with that is super powerful. Are there any questions? I'm going to just take a minute in the comments. Maybe I went through the material a bit quick. If you have questions about anything I've mentioned in the past section, before we get into the fractional COO section, let me know. Cool. So I'm going to get into the section. Again, if you have questions at any point, you can put an emoji in front of them so I could see them pop. Cool. So this section was meant, and if you've watched so far and you don't really care about what I do or why it could be relevant, that's completely fine. You can feel free to leave at any point. This section was meant more not as like I wouldn't say a sales pitch as much as kind of trying to shed some light on what fractional COOs are and how it works, because I find that a lot of people understand the concept of fractional CFO. I have a lot of people asking me what it is, so I figured I would talk about it. So basically, I think it was going to be interesting to start with what it's not. For me, and it's not because I have anything against consultants, but I think there's this kind of vision of what a consultant is and what it's not. For me, a consultant is usually someone who's going to come and someone who's outside of your business, first of all, but who's going to come and tell you this is a problem you have and this is how you could solve it, and give you a plan maybe, but not actually solve the problem for you. And for me, that's the distinction here, where I'm going to come in and put my hand in the meat grinder and help you actually fix the problem. And by helping, I mean, I could fix the problem. In a lot of the cases, I'm going to kind of come in and fix the issues myself. And my goal is to free up some time for you, right? So I'm not a consultant. I work outside of your company. I can work in your company as well. But for me, it's more like I'm not going to give you a plan. I'm going to make a plan and do the plan. And it's not a quick fix either. A lot of the times I get into businesses that have very few or no processes at all. And setting up processes are not necessarily something that can happen overnight. In some cases, I mean, there are some use cases where some problems can be fixed easily, but a lot of the time, there's an underlying problem. Even when sometimes it happened in the past that I've worked with clients who told me my problem X, Y, Z, and then I started talking to employees and better understanding how the businesses worked and realized that the problem was actually something else entirely. And so we're often talking about kind of structural things. And I'm not necessarily a product manager either, right? I will catch a lot of the balls, but I kind of see myself more as a external member of your leadership team, where ideally I come in and I have, expertise, but also I'm coming to I'm invested in the success of your company, and I want your company to grow. I'm not just someone who's going to come and put things in place without kind of caring about what the general overall arching outcome is. Fractional CEO is, for me, like having a second brain. It's the way I think is the way I pitch it the most. I think is the thing that resonates the most. It's basically someone who can be there to understand what it's like to have a business, what it's like to be an entrepreneur also. because for a lot of people, being an entrepreneur is something that's very few people understand. It's hard to see, to turn it off. Can't like go home and not just think about your business all the time. And yeah, having someone who gets that and someone who understands what is at stake and all of those kind of the reality, and help you go through these periods of reflection is also super useful, I think. It took me a really long time to understand that. It took me a really long time to see how valuable it would be to have a partner in my business. And I only realized how powerful a great co founder fit is when I got one. And so when I did, I kind of set out to find out for myself afterwards, because I said, if I'm going to build a business again, I want to do it in the right conditions. Some people are alone and feeling overwhelmed. So I basically become that person who could kind of help relieve some of that pressure. And it's like basically having a CEO full time, except it's all the time, but some of the time, if that makes any sense. Where I'm not going to say I work for you 1 day a week and then only be available for you on Wednesdays. I will be available whenever you text me most of the time, or, within a few hours notice. I usually get back to people pretty quickly. But I only work for your business when I need to do some stuff. And the way I structure it is, basically I push like your business is my own. Like, I'm as committed as making this business a success as you would be. And I come with an expertise. I come with a team. I'm not an agency. I'm my own person, but I do have a lot of contacts and resources. So if we need someone specific for something, I can usually find that person pretty easily. And I have some people that I work with on the regular basis that are involved in some of the projects I do with clients as well, depending on the client's needs. I've never shied away from getting more expertise around the table. Um, I've been asked a lot about how to work with a fractional CEO. How do you know if it's for you? When is the right time to work with one? And how would you work with one? So I think as far as like you being an entrepreneur, um, if you have if you're a solo founder and you're in a position where you do everything, even if you have partners, a lot of the times I'm going to meet teams that have a business person and a technical person, for example, but then the business person ends up being sales facing and everything else, which is could be very overwhelming as well. um, if you have a to-do list that never ends, you have a lot of ideas, you're a visionary, and then you need someone to help you catch all those balls and integrate those things into make them reality. If you feel overwhelmed and if you feel like you're not doing the things you want to be doing, that could be like we were talking about earlier, either relative responsibility wise, but also just you're not focusing on where you want to get. um, that might be points for you where it makes sense. um, if your team works completely independently and you can leave on vacation anytime and things keep going, then you might not need help. If you have processes that are so clear that everybody knows their role and everything is working, you have like a well oil machine, then you might not need help. And then there's also um, if you can't afford to pay yourself for salary, or if you can't commit time, um, I don't need a lot of time, but I still need some kind of knowledge transfer at the beginning to get going and understand what your vision is and what you have and where you want to go. I am pretty independent, and I usually am kind of like going to tell you what I need when I need something, and then the rest of the time kind of just do my own thing and report if needed. Um, but ultimately, I think the win is crunch point. What you want is to know that if you have inflection point. That could be growth, really aggressive growth, or a downsizing. That can also be a point where I come into businesses. I've also worked with a few businesses that are in the process of pivoting. So if you get to a point where you want to do something entirely, you're doing product and or service, or you want to go from one to the other, or you're changing completely your niche, that might be something that could be interesting. For me, I think the sweet spot where there is a bigger ROI as far as the value for the client, also as far as the work that needs to be done, I think is around the point where companies reach the about or around the $1 million mark, based on the fact that once you get there, by that time, you usually have a small team or a few employees. And if you get to the $1 million mark, you've kind of figured out how to do money. You're not at a point where you're aggressively scaling yet, but there's usually no process at all, or very, very few processes at that point. And so for me to come into a business like this, it's a bit easier based on the fact that there are a lot of things that I could do quickly that are going to kind of relieve a lot of pressure. And then at that point, we're talking about finances, and I'm talking about everything that's kind of like operation and sales. I usually work at the intersection of the three. So sales, finance, and ops. So making sure that you have the bandwidth to deliver the stuff you sold, but also at the opposite side, making sure you can sell the stuff that you have to sell. And that all of those kind of three departments are talking to each other. And for me, the thing about operations is it's kind of a black box where everything that doesn't go in someone else's department usually ends up in operations. So in that sense, the turf that I work in is pretty wide. Operations for me doesn't necessarily mean the daily operations of the business. I try to kind of stay away from becoming a bottleneck. But in a lot of cases, I'm going to try and get to do a bit of everything when I start to better understand how the company works and see what we need and how we can fix it. And that's an example of what I've done with ScaleQuest. ScaleQuest is a company that sells cold calling services, and they do it in a very different way where they're not trying to book calls at all costs. They're trying to build relationships and make people feel warm and fuzzy inside in a way. So when I started working with Tami, the first thing I did was do a lot of calls. I basically hopped on a project for a client. I did number of hours of calls for a client and also calls for him to kind of better understand how people felt and how people were reacting to the calls themselves, and just kind of understanding the reality of what it's like to work for him as an employee, but also what is the customer experience. And having that knowledge really gave me good insight on how do I move forward with doing what he needs, which is setting up processes to grow. So he was one of those people that I met and I was like, where did you spend your time? And he kind of didn't really know. So we started by tracking that and also looking at what he had and what he wanted to get, and then building those things. So we did a full integration of a CRM. We transitioned, he was running a lot of this stuff on Excel. So we kind of transitioned Excel to CRM. We mapped out the internal sell process, and then the customer journey to really figure out what's the packages, what's the value for each of those packages, and what's the experience for those clients, what are they trying to fix, and how do we do that for them? How do we make his life, as far as like reporting to clients, as easily as possible? He was doing manual reports every day, so we're like, okay, what can we automate? Data, reporting, all of those things. And yeah, so it was like a really cool experience for me as far as like building all those processes. I really had a lot of fun because I think CRMs are fun. and I'm one of those people. But I think it was also a really cool project for him to kind of get. It was the first time I think he got to work with someone else, because Tommy is a solo founder as well. So having that kind of knowledge and feedback from another experienced entrepreneur, which I think is interesting for me, also coming from an industry that was completely different, is interesting because I have seen other things in other industries that you might work or that might not work or not. But when you are in your industry and you only kind of talk to your industry and you stay in your, you could have a tendency to develop some kind of blinders to some extent. So it would be, I find it really interesting for me to work with a variety of different clients, because I get to see a lot of things in different industries and take some of those things and bring them to other kind of clients. The way I work is usually a 3-step process where I'm going to start by doing an audit, where I ask a lot of questions. And that's kind of why earlier I was saying there's an appeal to having more time at the beginning, because I'm typically go through everything. So that means financials, if there's any kind of forecasting, budgets, etc. And then sales process, anything that the client might have as far as documentation. And then another important step of that process for me is to go through, I basically book one-on-ones with key employees or department heads, and sometimes just any employees really, to kind of see how it is for them. How do they feel about the work they're doing? How do they feel they could be improving? And what is their reality? Because in order to kind of fix a problem, I want to really understand the root cause and see what that means on a day-to-day basis. And so that part for me is really just kind of getting a better understanding of your business and doing a lot of the things manually, even though they're not scalable. Then once I have that, I can kind of take a step back and work on a strategy and see, okay, this is the game plan. This is where you want to go. And this is how I go about fixing XYZ. I think the problem in this specific use case might be this. And this is how I would like to try and fix it and how I think it's going to take. And then once we're clear on that, I get going. Typically, this is not like I'm not going to do any work while I'm building a strategy for 3 months. This is usually a pretty quick process where I can start going and, hit the ground running in less than a month, depending on the clients and how big the project is. If I work on a smaller scope project, usually those things happen much faster, right? And that's usually how I go about it. Right now, the 2 typical ways that I work with clients is either on a retainer basis, where I work, we sign a contract for, 6 months to 12, when it's like, well, we have these priorities and I'm going to work on XYZ. And that's the same price every month. And I kind of modulate my hours based on the needs of the client. The other option is to do a small project. This is interesting in the use case where the goal is very specific. There's a very specific need, and it's like, well, I need help with a customer, CRM integration, or doing new forecasts and kind of just revising the strategy. And those things could be usually done in more restrictive number of hours. And if we're looking at doing something, in the next 2 months, then it usually makes more sense because the deliverables are really clear. There's like 1 or 2 deliverables, and the focus can be kind of narrowed down to what the client wants. And so in those cases, it's probably going to be a fixed price based on whatever the need is at that point. And for retainers, well, it varies a lot depending on, but that's the prices you see on the slides are usually the average for what I do. Are there any questions? We have a couple of people watching right now. The chat has been pretty quiet. I believe there was some kind of problem with joining. I hope that has been fixed. And if not, I'm assuming you guys can watch the replay afterwards. I kept some time for questions. I kind of went quick because we didn't have that many. I will give it a few minutes for questions. I think Another point I wanted to briefly expand on is the fact that what I do varies a lot, right? The client's needs are very different. And so the whole, how do you work with a fractional CEO? How do you know it's time if you don't know, but you feel like you need help, or the current state of, how things are right now doesn't feel like that's it, right? That's usually a good place to kind of pick up a conversation, I think. Um, and then again, it doesn't involve anything for anybody. Having a talk with an infinite entrepreneur sometimes is just kind of cool to have, an opinion or a second opinion, I guess. And then the other thing is it's also like a matter of fit. So no matter if anything I said in here today was felt like that was really it, and then we happen to not really, I guess, vibe with each other, that's completely fine. I'm first and foremost looking for a great human fit when I work with clients and partners, and I mean just like business relationships in general. And that's completely okay. I think I've met a number of fractional CEOs at this point now to know that everybody I met had a wildly different background with wildly, different expertise, which is kind of interesting because we bring different things to the table. Um, I've met some fractional CEOs who have been, executing for a number of things for a number of years. I've met some that are more on the CFO side, which is a different, I mean, there's a lot of overlap between operations and finance. And so a lot of people end up being in charge of a P&L. So it makes a lot of sense for kind of finance to creep into the operations. Um, I think the other thing is also having some kind of, yeah, figuring out what are the areas you need help with. So in my case, something I really like to do is finance, and I rarely take on projects that don't have some kind of money component to them. I will if it happens and I have a good fit. But if you are someone who is really strong at finance and you're looking for someone to take on the very more like sales part, I think knowing what you need, knowing what you are, and kind of help you um, fix the gap in terms of the overall skill sets you need for the business. There's a question here, quite interesting. So for nonprofit receiving subsidies, is there anything to keep in mind when interpreting today's information? I'm thinking of nonprofits that do indeed execute on profits generating activities, but with a budget that's supplemented by donation. Understandable if this question is too deep or touches off topic in a way. Doesn't slow down the agenda at all. What do you mean by interpreting today's information? I think, I mean, you're asking about, generating money, right? Executing on profit activities. I think so. I don't feel like it's fair to call them profit generating activities in the sense of if you're a nonprofit, you don't make a profit, right? If you're a nonprofit and you are trying to sell something to someone, then you might become, you make, you're generating more money to be reinvested. Because at the end of the day, the money is going to be used towards your cause or paying employees to be able to deliver more of the product or service that you guys are offering. As I think like the operation part of it is usually the trickiest part, because for a lot of nonprofits, there's a lot of labor, like humans that are involved that need to be paid. Okay, you question fractional CEO working with companies with revenue. So I've worked with mostly for-profit companies. I have been on the board of a nonprofit for a couple of years. We were in the nonprofit I was involved in was in the medical sector. So I think it's a bit different because in our cases, the operations cost the cost of operating the organizations were extremely high. So in our case, we didn't really have the luxury of trying to find creative ways to cut costs. They're just going to run more lean because there were some safety issues with some of the patients we were offering the service to, because they were people with Alzheimer's, right? So the cost of operating were pretty much the same as any kind of other kind of organization that provides healthcare for these kind of profiles of people. And I think, I'm happy to talk about it privately afterwards also. I think you've messaged me in my DMs on LinkedIn, so I'm happy to pick up the conversation at that point. I'm not sure if that clarifies your question. If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to do that. I think I don't have any other things to cover right now. We don't have any other questions, so I might kind of just call it and let you guys enjoy the rest of your lunch and take advantage of that beautiful snowstorm that we had, and go shovel your car for an extra couple more minutes. If you live in Montreal and you've seen the state of our streets right now, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, thank you guys for coming. I hope this shed some light on a couple of interesting topics. And if you want to talk about your specific use case or have questions about what you are doing with this year, feel free to email me directly or connect on LinkedIn. Have a good day. Bye, guys.